Hello, everybody, and first of all, welcome to a new season of Essence Podcast. This whole season, Essence Podcast Into the Woods, is dedicated to folkloric and traditional witches and pagans of various different stripes, and I'm very pleased to have on for our first inaugural episode, Byron Ballard. Thank you so much for coming on, Byron.
Oh, I'm so happy and honored to be here. I didn't realize I was the first of the season.
You're the very first. You're the very first.
Very important.
So everybody has to follow in your footsteps. This is going to be a
Okay.
big thing.
I'll try to be really, really interesting.
So, for those of you who don't know who Byron is, I think most of the readers, or most of the listeners will know who you are because you've been published for such a long time now. But for those who are newer and may not know what your work is, let me find your... So H. Byron Ballard, BA, MFA, is a Western North Carolina native, teacher, folklorist, and writer. She has served as a featured speaker and teacher at Sacred Space Conference, Pagan Spirit Gathering, Southeast Wise Women's Herbal Conferences, the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, and many others. She is a co-founder of Asheville's Coalition of Earth Religions series and Mother Grove Goddess Temple, where she serves as senior priestess. She podcasts about Appalachian folkways on Weird Mountain Gals. And some of the previous titles that she's put out, Storbs in Ditchwater, Aspidity and Mad Stones, and some of more recent ones, Seasons of Magical Life, A Pagan Path of Living with Wiser, and Roots, I have it right here, Roots, Branches, and Spirits. And as of tomorrow, you have a brand new one, Small Magics, coming out through Llewellyn.
Yes, I do. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, so I'm glad this is why you're the first, because it just so happened that your book was coming out so soon. So how about we start with, before we get into like a really deeper conversation, let's talk a little bit about the book. Give us a little bit about what the book is and where people can find it.
Well, let me give you a little bit of backstory about
Perfect.
Magic.
Please do.
For I don't know how many years, but certainly pre-COVID, I started teaching a class called Basic Practical Magic because I kept talking, especially to younger people who thought if I just buy one more spell book, I'm going to be really good at magic. And the problem for all of them, and not just young people, but people new to the practices, is that they weren't willing to practice. They just kept thinking they were going to buy that silver bullet that was going to teach them everything they needed to know, but they wouldn't have to practice it. So I offered this class probably 6 or 7 years ago for the first time. And it was all about grounding. It was about learning to shield. It was about harvesting energy from the world around you, celestial energy, earth energy, and utilizing that in the practice of magic. It's simple, practical magic. And I encouraged people after the first class, where I had a couple of ceremonial magicians come in, and I'm not going to say they looked down their noses; they didn't, but they did say, "Oh, I didn't. I mean, that's not the way I do it." And I was like, "No, I'm sure it isn't, but this is a different kind of way to do magic." So the reason the book is what the book is because you will be unsurprised to learn that sometimes I get into arguments on the internet with people.
I haven't seen any of those, but
so it was a big discussion about magic, and my constant drumbeat is we call it practicing magic because you need to practice it. You need to set time aside, and then you'll be good at it. You can't wait until the last minute, saving it for a rainy day, because then you won't be very good at it.
Yeah.
So we're having kind of an argument about it, I guess. And then my editor at Llewellyn contacted me and said, "What about if you did a book about this?" And I went, "Okay, yeah, that sounds good." So that's what Small Magics is. It is the building blocks of magical practice, because most people now don't have a teacher. I was really fortunate in a sense because there weren't a lot of books, But
Hmm.
there are a lot of people who are willing to say things like, let me tell you what grounding is and what that will do for you. And here are some techniques for that. So that's the basis of small magics. And I'm
I
excited
love
that
that.
it's already in some people's hands. And I've already gotten some feedback about, oh, that's what people mean when they say fill in the blank.
That's really important. I've noticed. I think most of the listeners here will have noticed this too, that especially with folkloric and traditional approaches now, as opposed to kind of the Wiccan or neo-pagan traditional senses. A lot of the material is in folklore books, which are not going to tell you about how to ground, how to raise energy, how to sustainably connect with spirits or the landscape or whatnot. And so to have this book as a grounder and a foundational course, I think that's fantastic. With that, then, because I mean, I'm about to release a review of this one. Marcus, our publicist, sent this to me a couple of months ago. What I loved about this one in particular was how cozy it was, how inviting into the family it was. You talk about the traditions and the approaches, as though we're sitting over a cup of tea, and a lot of in this, at least, there's that piece about it's a lived practice. It's you continue to build on top, but if people are coming in and don't necessarily have that foundational work, there might be some pieces in this that are lost. I'm not saying that you missed those out, but I think it's that perception piece, right? What was it like for you to go from something like this, or something like some of the other works that you've done, which is really connecting with the landscape of Appalachia and the traditions and the pieces of that is a lived culture? What was that like for you to shift gears and move into writing this? If that makes any sense whatsoever.
No, it absolutely does. But I'm inviting you, but now into the Wayback Machine. In 2008, I think, before you were born, years before you were born,
Thank you. I
um,
appreciate that.
I was in I was invited up to Harvard to do a colloquium called Forging Folklore. And in that, I delivered a paper, standard 20-minute academic paper called Hill Folks Hoodoo and the Question of Cultural Strip Mining.
Hmm.
And it was very well received. And I started talking more and more about living in a culture that was dominated by extraction industries and has been now for hundreds of years. And then I felt very strongly that I needed to just write a bunch of stuff down, that it wouldn't be
Right.
lost.
Hmm.
That I was just going to document what it was I knew, what my family knew, what I had learned in the intervening years, all of that. That was all I was going to do. That's the first book, Stalbs and Ditchwater. Then I went on tour with that book, thinking that these things were just disappearing as part of the culture, that the culture itself is thinning out as people come into the region who don't have a particular connection either with the land or the people of the land. And I came to discover in doing that book tour that people are doing this all over the Appalachian region, but they're not writing books about it for Llewellyn, and or anyone. They don't hang out a shingle saying, I am your village witch, as I have done.
Right.
They are just known in their community. If they need a particular thing done, people know to go to Barbara because Barbara knows how to do that.
Right. Right.
And out of that experience came my second book, Aspidity and Madstones. And you said that so beautifully. A lot of people trip
Thank you.
over aspidity. And that went a little more deeply into the practices because I realized in just trying to write down the folkloric aspect that I'd missed some of the practical stuff. So that was that book. I have to tell you, Llewellyn contacted me about Roots, Branches, and Spirits, and it was my editor, Heather Green. Hey, Heather, hope you're watching. And Heather said, I've just left an editorial meeting, and this is what Llewellyn wants. We want someone to rewrite the Foxfire series, but give it kind of a pagan bent. And I just started laughing. And I said, okay, I know this series intimately, and I'm telling you right now, I don't have the time left in my life to do that. You don't have the money to pay me to do it. That was an
Right.
enormous project that was done by dozens and dozens of people, and it is still an ongoing project. I said, but what I can do for you is write you a book on Appalachian folkways. And she said, yes, I think that's what we want. So that's how that book emerged, and it goes even more deeply. So if you really want to know more about the culture, Staubs and Ditchwater will really bring you into that. If you want to know more about the herbal aspects and some of that, then aspidity is the one. But roots, branches, and spirits, I tried to bring all of that together. I love the way you do that, to bring it all together and then to add in anything I didn't think I had really been clear about before. And ghost stories. So spirits, they're
Yes.
really
The
important to us.
Haints.
So, yes, so I had to put
Yes.
out a few paints in there.
Love that.
So that's how all of that happened. And then the current book, Small Magics, I mean, it is from my point of view as an Appalachian woman, just it's the grounding of how you do magical practice. And it works for any kind of magical practice. I think, I mean, I will hear from people, I'm sure, who go, oh, no, I don't do it anywhere like that. And I'm perfectly successful. And that'll be fun to hear, too. That'll be always good. We are such a profoundly diverse community on so many
Totally.
levels. Even though I go to a festival in the summer, I don't see a lot of brown faces. I don't see a lot
Right.
of old people. And I don't see a lot of young
Yeah.
people. The demographic is really narrow when you're going to a camping event. And part of that is that it's a camping event. Not
This is the
everybody wants
thing.
to go
Yeah.
camping. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the thing. This is the culture of even how events are organized. Like in the UK, conferences tend to be much bigger than in the States, mainly because people can get to them faster. But also, a lot of the older time pagans over there are not interested in going into a field just outside of town to camp for a weekend, right? Yes. Yeah.
Couldn't we do this at the university? Why? Why are we here?
Right. Right. So, I mean, if I were to take what you just said and kind of reverse it, if people were looking at, approaching kind of a young person in Appalachia, little middle of nowhere Appalachia, or in big city Appalachia, right, was interested now that they've kind of clued into, okay, there's this thing called folkloric practice, there's this thing called tradcraft, and I'm reading stuff a lot from the UK, a lot from Britain, a lot of stuff from over there, because a lot of the material is based in that culture. I asked Madame Pamita this, and I've asked a couple of the other people writing on other regions outside of England and Britain, right? Would you say then that there are linkages with your small magics that will then bring you into deeper things like this, or should they start with things like this and then go backwards?
Well, it depends on is their interest in the cultural piece? And
Right.
frankly, if you grew up in Appalachia, you probably are
You
pretty
already know.
immersed in the cultural piece. But what happened here, and it certainly happened in Ireland and Scotland, is that there's been a huge diaspora. So people had to leave Appalachia for jobs, frankly. And so when I travel, I will meet people literally all over the country who will say to me, oh, my great grandmother lived in Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee, and I remember all the stories that came down to me. So it's helpful for those people who want to recapture some of that Appalachian stuff that has for them become folkloric. So
Yeah.
that it's all these soft stories about, oh, I remember my grandma, she had an outhouse and she planted hollyhocks all around it. It was so beautiful. And
Right.
when I go in the summer, I'd help gather eggs and and I'd go to the bathroom there and so it becomes this soft, beautiful setting when what we're really talking about is hard subsistence farming.
Right,
But
right.
because they have this gloss on it of the way the ancestors were, and we all do that with our ancestors. Oh,
Totally,
well,
totally do.
back in ancestral time, and you just think about, do you know anything about the Middle Ages, people? Because you would not be alive at this point. You would have
This
died
is the thing.
long
How many
ago.
people died,
Long
right?
ago.
Very, very
Yeah.
quickly.
So part of it is for those people, but what I really dearly hope is that there are people in the United States who look at the culture from which their family comes.
Mhm.
And instead of going, oh, I'm going to be an Appalachian person now,
Right, right, right.
you don't need to do that. Figure out, are your people German? Or do they
Mm,
come out of the German speaking countries? Well, go back and look at that and look at
mm,
what the folklore is from that. We have wonderful examples using Germany as an example of the
mm.
Deutsch culture up in
Yes.
Pennsylvania because they are
Hmm.
really having a huge resurgence of what they're doing.
Hmm.
But and I encourage people, don't go to your grandma and say, now what, did we have any witches in the family? Was there any witchcraft?
Right.
Because you might just get your mouth washed out with soap.
Yeah, because
But
witch is very different context in traditional culture, right?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. But if you go to your grandma and say, I heard stories about some of that weird old stuff we used to do about the broken glass in the window and a jar,
Mm,
and that will open up those stories because I mean, old people love to tell stories. Everybody
they
loves
do.
to tell
They
stories.
do.
And you
Yeah.
might have to read between the lines, but you're gonna get what the real stuff is, and
Yeah.
it's not going to be some lightweight, sweet little thing. It's going to be about how hard it is to live in the world.
Completely, completely and utterly. And the response to then how and the relationship to the hardness of that world. Yeah. This is,
Yeah.
I think this is the thing that a lot of people, I think, and I want to hear your perspective on this. I think the danger with just then looking at folkloric texts is that often that gloss can come on. And we see this from those old Victorian men who were troopsing into little villages and asking questions, right? It's true, like, with
Right.
the patches on their arms, right? It can be often that, like, looking down on being, the hill folk, oh, they're just superstitious nonsense over there, but let's go and talk to them because what they're doing is quaint, right? That still shows
Right.
up even in folklore studies now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious for you, sitting in both worlds as both a folklorist and also as a practitioner, and a folklorist practitioner, how do you balance those two paradigms within yourself and like your own work? How do you navigate between those two worlds?
It just feels very natural. I
Yeah.
mean, I grew up with this all around me, and so when I talk to somebody in another state, another part of the region, it's so interesting to hear what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've been enjoying now for several years is back in the turn of the last century, people came into this region from outside, the same kind of folkloric headhunters that you were just
Right.
speaking of, and they would hear music being sung and played on these very remote fastnesses, and they go, wait a minute, I know that song.
Mm.
That's Child Ballad 1705. That's Barbara Allen. I
Right.
know that
Right.
song. And what they started calling themselves were song catchers because they
Mm.
would hear a particular piece of music and then they track it back. And they go, oh, well, this comes from Northumberland. Oh, well, this comes from Ireland. This comes from wherever. So I've been doing a similar thing with folk
Mm.
magic. I've been calling myself a spell catcher, that I've been
Mm.
tracking Appalachian folk magic back to some of its roots, which is why I try to spend every 2 or 3 years, I go into the border region between England and Scotland, because that's
Mm.
where a lot of these people came from. They went
Yeah.
from the borders, where they were the border reavers, and then a lot of them got shoved into Ulster, and from there they
Mm.
went into Pennsylvania, and then down the valley of the Shannon of the Swan up down to here. So yeah.
Mm. Mm. So it's not engaging then with that kind of paternalistic, patriarchal looking down, that like the scientific rationalism that can seep into
Oh,
humanity so often, right?
yeah, no, it's all about the land and the planting and the tending and the birth
Mm,
and babies and the healing. There's a lot about healing. And
very much
some of
so.
that is herbal healing, of course, but other parts of it are just there are phrases that we learned. And when you say that phrase over a burn, it pulls the fire out of the burn. It's those
Mm,
practices that I still practice. And
hmm.
then I would say to whoever I did that, so does the burn feel better? Because I really believe in magical practice. You have to have some checks and balances. You can't just
Absolutely.
go, you can't just go, oh, and now I'm doing my thing, and here are in my three rhymed couplets, and here is one other little piece, and then I slap my hands together and it's done. Yeah,
Mm,
feel free to do that. But then go back to whoever you did that with or for and say to them, now, how are you feeling about that? How is that situation?
mm.
How is your life? Has your life changed after we did this work for you?
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. That's the thing, it's lived practice then. It's an experience
Yeah,
as opposed to a psychological state, right?
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So that when people come to me and they go, "Here is my issue. What kind of spell do I need for that?" I want to back them up and go, "We need to talk about way more things than what kind of spell you can throw on this. We need to talk about the situation. We need to talk about how you engage with the spirits around you, all of those things. There is a lot
Yeah,
to explore. And honestly, Ben, I think half of magic is just paying attention, just
I agree.
slowing down long enough to pay
Yeah,
attention to the world around you, to the people around you, to the spirits around
yeah.
you. Yeah. And to listen.
It's true. Well, that listening piece, I can't think who I was chatting to, but it was the same thing in my last season. That idea that, so much of how magic is promoted, and in a lot of 101 books, let's be honest here, it's people are coming with expectations that it's going to be like Harry Potter, where it's, a big magical thing happening. Right? Whereas real magic is that paying attention, but in a different way, being present to, because we get so many psychological lenses come up, and I think that comes back to what I wanted to ask you about, particularly with your travels. Anybody who knows you, anybody who's followed you for any short amount of time, will very quickly realize that you are very interested in female empowerment and really raising the voice of women in wherever context you're in. Um, I feel like those of us who are part of marginalized communities who are forced to be present in a different way, mainly because of fear, mainly because we're in that state of having to constantly be watching, women, members of the queer community, members of any visible minority, right? Constantly having to be aware and focused. We all tend to be then practicing these traditions. It's very interesting. I'm wondering what it's been like for you to let's start with this intergenerational work. You run a goddess temple, or you're a head priestess of a goddess temple in Appalachia, but you've gone to various places, the Parliament of World Religions, you've gone to Glastonbury, all of these. What is it like for you to work with individuals, particularly women, for example, of different generations? Perhaps younger generations who are constantly have their phone right here and they're constantly plugged in all of this. What is it like for you? I hope that's not too big of a question, but I'm really curious, actually.
No, but it's a good question because it makes me think um, patience is a virtue. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us could use more virtues. I'm sure of it. It is easy. It is easy, I think, to judge other people and to say, well, if you would just put the phone down for 5 minutes and go sit under a tree, your life would be different. But that's not helpful. And part of what I feel is really, really important is that we help each other. That it's not just about sitting on the mountain and telling you the wisdom of the age.
Right.
That instead it's about listening. So I am a big defender of the TikTok witches. And
Okay.
people, my generation, just they go, "What the hell?" And I say, "Look, it's like this. Don't tell me when you were that age that at 5 minutes to midnight you didn't pull out a damn Ouija board and put it on your mother's card table and get three of your best friends and start making ooh noises so you could talk to some spirits. Don't tell me you didn't do that, because I damn well know you did. And so the only difference is when the TikTok witches hex the moon or they hex the fae or whatever thing, they videotape it so that it stays forever. So that 20 years from now, their friends can pull that thing up in whatever device way they can. Go, remember when we did this crazy stuff? You remember that? And they also have, 200,000 followers who are going, oh, hex the moon. That seems like a good idea. I think I'll try that too. So, and it all goes back to, I firmly believe practicing magic, doing witchcraft is experiential. So you stand in a circle with your 8 best friends, and maybe you drank tequila ahead of time, and then you decide you're going to rustle up some big words, you're going to hex the moon. Well, maybe for a month you just keep watching the moon, waiting for it to fall out of the sky or whatever you hexed it to do, and it doesn't happen. Then what that should tell us is, well, maybe that wasn't a very effective working to do. What was our intention behind that? Because sometimes our intention is just to show that we are magical. I'm a magical being.
Of course, right?
So I want you to see how magical I am. And,
yeah.
We mostly grow out of that. I'm not going to say we always do, because I know some people in their 70s and 80s who never grew up.
I do too. Yes.
So the idea that anybody can do this, I think, is a good idea. And that you just listen to the particular person and really hear what they're saying, because it may be that their phone is the way they hide from having to interact with somebody in a personal way. And when they finally are with somebody who's just going to say, I'm just going to listen to you and look you in the eye, if that's okay, it changes things. And that's across the board. It's across the board, no matter what your age is or your culture.
I completely agree. Something I've especially my work as a therapist, a lot of people who I work with who are either Druidry or Wiccans or traditional witchcraft, or whatever alternative spirituality, they're usually coming from a place of trauma. They're usually coming from a place of needing empowerment, finding a place to be in. And I know that I mean, I certainly had that experience myself. It's funny, I was talking about that kind of like things being online for years and years. It's a little different, but I was on Pagan Space and Mystic Wix back 20 years ago. And, forums for us. Were you on there too?
Sort of, not really.
Sort of, yeah. So Mystic Wix is still there. It was brought back again, and a lot of the posts are still on there. And I was talking to Theo Geddy Parma down in Australia, and I remember like something about their name. There was something about their name that really clicked every so often when I saw it. And it turns out we were both on that website together. So we were just going down memory lane. I feel like there's a lot more content out there now for people to go back and do retrospectives with and see where they've come from, so that their growth is right there in front of them. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's also very meta and very strange too, right?
It is, and we're in a place now where we, in all the years of Wicca, it was your religious, your spiritual, your magical practice were all woven together. And now, with kind of the reemergence of folkloric practice, we understand that magic can be completely separated from religion. Now, yes. I don't think magic can be separated from the spiritual realm, but the spiritual realm is engaging with spirits. It's not spirituality. Right. So we're seeing that those can be different things. When I was on my way to the Parliament of the World's Religions, somebody who knows me as a folkloric practitioner said, well, I mean, why would you go to something that's about religion? Aren't you an Appalachian folk witch? And I went, and I got real kind of stiff back like this. And I went, well, as a matter of fact, I'm a 3rd degree Wiccan high priestess, and that isn't the religion that I practice. And they were like, oh. So So it's been an interesting diverging, I think, of those two things, which I hope
Mm,
will lead us to a clearer practice of both so that you
mm,
understand that your magical practice, whatever word you put around that. Witchcraft is a word that I use as the descendant of Western Europeans.
right,
And
right.
as a woman of my age, because we reclaimed the word witch, but when I am talking to friends, Cherokee friends on the Qualla boundary, I don't use that word
Hmm.
because it means something totally different to indigenous
Completely.
cultures. So the languaging around that, I think we have to just be aware of. I'm not going to say careful because I think in a lot of times in our culture, we're too careful about
Yes,
everything. And it's
yes.
one of the reasons people are afraid to practice magic because they think
Yeah.
somehow, that funny meme that appears on Facebook of the guy who has conjured up what he thought was a demon, but because it was that lovely Spencerian script, he conjured a lemon.
Yes, I loved that.
And so I think that a lot of people are so afraid, oh, what if I get in touch with a spirit and it
Mm,
absorbs me or it enters me or it hurts me in some way. And
mm,
and so they don't practice kind of the basics. So part of what this book
yes.
does and part of what that class did was to say, find something you need every day practically. So I live in a big tourist town, and if I'm going to go downtown, I'm going to need parking.
Right.
So me perfecting a parking spell was really, really important. And for a lot of people, that's going to be
Mm,
important. I mean, you, my love,
mm,
are returning to the land of mass transit
right.
where you don't have to have a car. You can take the bus to the train and the train to the whatever. But
Hmm.
here, if you are moving about in most moderately sized cities or smaller, you're going to need an automobile. And so what
Totally.
do you need for that? You need parking, you need your car to start, to
Hmm.
run, and to stop when you want it to stop. So find
Yes.
something that you need practically and
Yes.
perfect it. So don't do the scattershot approach of, I'm going to learn all these different things, plus I'm going to do ceremonial magic, and I'm going to learn
Mm,
whatever. Pick a thing,
hmm.
learn a thing. Because for one thing, it will give you confidence in what you're doing. Because you'll be
Hmm.
like, I got a parking spell. It works every time. And I
Right.
do have a parking spell that works every time. I've gotten parking
Hmm.
in Manhattan, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, it's a
Right.
great parking spell and it works really, really well. So find the thing that you need and
Yeah.
work magic around that.
I love that you end your Small Magics book on that permission piece because I think that key piece right there is why so many people think that they have to have everything. And I think it's a stage. I think it's a phase. I think people phase out of that and take ownership of their practice. But I think when you're first entering into these traditions, there's that kind of Christian orthodoxy. You have to do it right. You have to do it right. So you have to have everything. And in doing so, like you were saying, people aren't taking ownership of that. But I love about that permission piece. Can you talk about that then? What is it? What made
Yeah,
you write that permission piece?
that comes out of my tarot practice.
Okay.
And when I am at home, I read tarot at a local metaphysical shop, Raven and Crone, on Tuesdays from 1 to 5.
There we
And
go.
there we go. There's a little advertisement for you. And I find more and more that I lay the cards out, but really I'm there as a counselor. So
Mhm.
I'm not telling them, and then your future is a tall, dark, handsome man. I will say you are in a time now where confusion is rampant for you, and it would be wise for you to take a step back, to drop
Mm,
everything you can drop, all of that. And they always look at me and go, well, I don't know how to do that because I have responsibility for my children, my spouse, my job,
right.
my garden, all that stuff. And I started just putting my hand out like this and writing on my hand and saying, here is your permission slip, and I slide it across the table to them, and that has been helpful. I
Yeah.
hear back from clients that that's helpful, but no, of course they don't need permission. But there's something about the culture, the Calvinist dominated American
It's true.
culture, that
Hmm.
tells you if you don't have express permission to do something, the hammer is going to fall.
Yeah.
So I love doing that, and I did that at a conference a few years back, and I literally walked to the door and I mimed hammering the permission slips up beside the door. Said, and as you leave, go ahead and take a permission slip so you know you can do whatever it is you need to do for this
Mm-hmm.
issue. And there were a number of people who stopped by the door and who mimed ripping off their permission slip, putting it in their pocket or putting it in their purse and then going out. So there's something about
Mm.
giving people permission that I think is really important. I imagine you find that as a therapist too, is giving the
All the
people the
time.
freedom
Oh,
to make the decision.
yeah, all the time. Something that with my own book, that I was very adamant about when I wrote it was I don't want to give anybody any ritual, anything that they can do. I'm going to ask them good questions. Because I find that once you start to ask good questions, and those questions are challenging the narrative that they exist within, suddenly it's like a weight just disappears. Oh, wait, no, I've been locked into this story that I've been telling myself, right? You
Right,
see the
right,
same
right.
thing? Yeah,
I
yeah,
do. I see it all the time, and that becomes so much a part of our armor to live through the
Mm,
culture and survive in the culture that we don't realize that was applied.
yeah.
Like that's not on the inside, that's on the outside. That's something your personal history gave you, your culture gave
Mm,
you, and you can pull that piece off and find
very
out
much
what's
so.
underneath. And a lot of people don't feel like they have permission to do that.
I'm going to ask you a weird question. I'm curious what you think. Anybody who's been around the community long enough know that certain goddesses come into vogue and they come into trends, right? Keridwen, Hecate, Santísima Muerte, all of these. Kali was big for a little while, Inanna. Do you think that Do you think that that is because those stories are what is needed to give permission to that generation in those phases? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I do think that. I think it gives them permission, but I also think that particularly for women in the culture, I'm going to back up a little bit and say I'm a huge Tolkien fan.
Yes.
So I started reading The Hobbit when I was about 10 and then went straight into The Lord of the Rings. And for women my age, when you were reading something like that, you wanted to associate with a character. Well,
Yeah.
the gaffer didn't give us a whole lot of female characters to associate with. And the ones that he did give us are very sort of two-dimensional. I mean,
Yeah.
Galadriel's lovely, but what I really
Beautiful.
wanted to yeah, lovely. But what I really wanted to be was a hobbit girl. But there weren't
Right.
a lot of hobbit girls. So what women and I think minorities, I think this certainly is true for African
Mm-hmm.
Americans, for years, we have been looking for models about how we can be. And so
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, they want to see something that they can aspire to,
Right.
someone that they can aspire to. And so the Morrigan was huge for a while. Everyone was shaving half their head and getting a big Celtic tattoo. And good, good. And there was a lot of she is
Mm-hmm.
calling forth people to, well, did she call us forth? And then what did we do? Nothing. What did we
Mm-hmm.
do? Really, what did we do? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it just, I don't like to think of them as goddess fads, but as
Mm.
different, as a reintroduction of a particular flavoring of the divine
Right.
feminine that can
Right.
appeal to a particular demographic of people. But what we think we know about ancient goddess cultures is that in the same way we think of the Abrahamic God as being the God of all things, is that a goddess of a particular place was the goddess of that place and she was the goddess of everything.
And that's
So
exactly it.
yeah. So when we think about Bridget, who I'm a big fan of, and I don't suppose I can show you my big old tattoo,
Oh, I
but
love it. I love it.
I've got a big Bridget squeal on my arm. So the thing that we know about Bridget is that she was a goddess for a long, long time. And then she made this interesting transition into sainthood. So now she kind of stands, she stands as the bridge between those two cultures. And
Mm.
when you start talking here at Imbolc, we're always, oh,
Yeah.
beautiful Bridget, let's sing the songs of Bridget. And then you start talking about what she's the goddess of: beer, bread, healing, poetry, smithcraft, weaving. So she becomes then the representative of what we believe all these ancient goddess cultures were, that Athena was not just the goddess of wisdom and war,
Yeah.
she was the goddess of Athens. And
Right.
that meant as an urban goddess, she had particular places that she walked in where her influence was. But now how do we address Athena as non-Athenians?
Yeah.
What then do we do with that energy? So I think it's
Mm.
more introductions to all those different facets so that we come to a place in modern culture where we can say goddess without
Mm.
flinching. And we can
Yeah.
say goddess without thinking of a particular kind of razor or a particular woman with a particular kind of body. But we can think of that as all encompassing, as that energy that both is and runs the universe. And when
Yeah.
we can think of that, then yes, we may have an affinity towards a particular piece of that, but there is a totality there that we are missing right now, frankly.
I agree. No, I completely agree. Part of my own background, spiritual background, for a long time I was in a Lukumi Ile, so I was connected with the priest I was under. My godfather was crowned Oshun, and a lot of the issues in the ATRs are of either, particularly North Americans, doesn't matter what ethnic background they come from, but particularly North American Westerners, coming in with that view of, spirits and deities and whatnot as being deity of, spirit of, all of this. And it's what we grew up with in English class of reading Greek mythology, right? But it's a very limiting, and it comes back to that whole, the scholars with their arm patches wandering through the
Mm-hmm.
wilderness, right? When you actually start to look at these beings and these creatures, like you said, they are genius loci. They're the deity of place and everything that exists in that space, and we're the ones who are limiting them
Yeah,
in that approach.
exactly.
Yeah, it's causing a lot of issues because, the over sexualization of some spirits because they happen to be connected with love. Well, they're connected with love, but they're also connected with hatred and jealousy and all of those kind of the bitter waters as well as the sweet waters, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
What do you
Yeah.
notice then, if I may? Because you just came back from the Glastonbury festival a couple of months ago. What do you notice between then when people from multiculturals come in to focus on these individual spirits and deities? What do you notice then of the differences in how different people are connecting with them then, from a cross-cultural perspective?
Sure. And I was not at
Yes.
Glastonbury this year.
Oh, I apologize.
So
Sorry, no.
yeah, but I've taught there before.
Hmm.
What tends to happen, and it happened to the Parliament of the World's Religions, is that
Hmm.
we want to flatten the concept of female divine, and we want to make it palatable. So here is this little piece here and this little piece here. And what
Hmm.
happens is it all becomes very sort of vanilla. Don't get me wrong, vanilla is a great flavor. I love it. But there is so much more to all of this. But we haven't learned yet how to interact on a real level. Just what you were talking
Hmm.
about with the traditional African deities. So there are issues around cultural appropriation, and there's no
Totally.
question about that.
Hmm.
But they are also, I believe, that they are also divinities who are calling out for followers, who are
Hmm.
calling out for people to feed them in whatever
Totally.
way they are required to be fed. And
Mm.
an example I will give you is that there was a huge storm in Haiti, and there are often huge storms in Haiti, and many people had died. And I got the very distinct impression that I needed to be doing psychopomp work around that. So I
Mm.
contacted some people I knew who were in ATRs, and I said, I'm being called to do this, and I feel good about doing. I don't feel good. I feel qualified to do psychopomp work,
Yes.
but I don't want to step on any toes. And they came back to me and said there are so many spirits now that are crossing, and we don't have enough priesthood in place to
Yeah.
do what needs to be done. So yes, please do that. And then I came
Mm.
back to them to say, is there a, a deity? Is there a goddess that I should particularly work with? And And they hedged their bets on that. And what they said was, and this is really important, they said, work with the goddess you work with. So instead of trying to adopt and pull into what my work is someone from an entirely different culture, why don't I look at the divine beings I work with and say, we're going to take this step by step and we're going to be careful because we don't want to overstep our boundaries. And we are not the bosses here, but there is a job of work that needs to be done.
Right,
And
right.
I believe we are here to do that and to work in that way. And so that's what I and several others ended up doing. And it's about listening again, Ben. It's about
Yes,
listening to the land, listening to the spirit world, listening to your ancestors, and listening with your heart so that
absolutely.
you don't go in with a bulldozer when you need to walk in quietly with a stout stick.
That's the thing. That's the thing. Learning as a therapist, learning to listen is one of a skill that we're not naturally developed. It's not something that we naturally know how to do. We have to develop that skill for ourselves. And once we do, it's shutting the mouth and opening up the ears, right?
I
Yeah.
wonder though if we were
Hmm.
better at that before the Industrial Revolution, when news came to us
Mm,
through story, where we didn't necessarily have a newspaper, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have books. And so
yeah.
our knowledge came to us from other humans bringing us the story. And maybe we were better at listening then. I think about um, Druidry and how
Mm,
part of what we think we know about ancient Druidry is that
yeah.
they didn't write anything down. That you had to spend up to 20 years learning the lore because you
Yeah.
had to learn it from other people and you had to memorize it so you could pass it on. So we may
Absolutely.
have been better at listening when we had less diversion, less
Is
distraction.
that yeah, no, I'm completely with you on that. It's and I think also the smaller community connections too. I mean, something you talk about a lot in your books, and a lot of folkloric practitioners talk about is the way that kind of the ancestral community structure has shifted so much. You said so many people have left Appalachia because of needing to go and get work. So many people are not rooted where the small community connections are. So many people are living in cities where they don't even know who their neighbor is, right? It's a different
Yeah.
form of community. A lot of people are finding it online. A lot of people are connecting online, but it's a different
Mhm.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of
And,
pieces to that.
yeah.
Hmm?
And that whole online community, I think, is a wonderful opportunity for pagans, heathens, however we want to group ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since COVID, I've been doing full moon
Mm-hmm.
gatherings and dark moon workings. I try to do it every month. Sometimes with my schedule, I can't. And I have been so surprised and so pleased that there is a whole community of people online who, like, for full moon, 2 or 3 days before I'll go, you all want to meet for full moon? And then I will just do a Facebook Live of the full moon. And I'm amazed at the number of people 50, 75, 100, 150 people who will tune in just to hear me tell them a story. It's
Right.
been really interesting. And we do this thing where we hold hands and people will say, I can feel the hands. I can
Yeah.
feel the hand on either side of me. So we, for years, for centuries, we've been talking about working on the astral and
Mm-hmm.
meeting on the astral and what it means. Well, the internet is the astral.
Totally.
So, so I do a full moon ritual, and one of the people who almost always comes lives in Australia.
Mm.
So what she says is hello from Australia and the future because
Right.
it's
That
already
is the
working
future.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so we have been pulled like taffy. What is space? What is time? All of those things to begin to build communities that really are not only global but are incredibly diverse. Because not everybody, as we talked about earlier, is going to want to come to a pagan festival. Not everybody can.
Yeah.
People who are differently abled or disabled, elder people, people in poverty. And we need to remember now that the world feels like it's being opened up again, though frankly, if you name a variant of COVID eris, you are asking for anything that happens to you. I'm just saying.
It's true.
So we have to remember when we are fully re-engaged in being together in a physical place that we can't lose those people who were with us when we were all on the astral. We have to
Totally.
go, yeah, it's not like you have to come and be with me now. It's like, no, no, we have to figure out, and we have the technology to do this.
We do.
That's the thing. We need to make sure that every one of these festivals builds in enough money to make sure that festival goes to all the people who want to attend the festival.
Hmm.
And we knew how to do that
It's
during
true.
COVID. We still know how to do it.
That's a huge piece, right? I've noticed, and we were talking before we started recording about that, and I'm curious to hear that from you. But that piece around a lot of festivals either switching from suddenly online to only in person now, suddenly all these people from around the world who were enjoying that content and that enjoying that community don't have that anymore. And let's be honest here, a lot of people start coming to these traditions because of they're isolated, because they don't feel belonging to their physical communities. I mean, that was me, a gay teenager in the middle of nowhere, wanting to be in Toronto because I wanted to be where the witches were at, right? Right? It's one of those things. I feel like it creates that opportunity, but you're going through that with your own goddess temple, right? You're starting to explore that. What do you think
Mhm.
the COVID times gave you that you didn't have before?
Well, there are gifts of COVID. There's no question. One of the gifts of COVID is that we have right now, we are not guaranteed time or space. And we need to
Mm,
be aware of that at any point, those people that you take for granted that are always going to be there, whether they're your parents and family,
mm,
or they're just your good friends, you never know when there's going to be the post in social media about so and
yeah.
so who just dropped dead. So that's one of the gifts of COVID is to remind us that we are mortal and that we don't know how much time we have. I remember when I turned 60,
Mm,
I was doing that weird math that people do. It's like, well, my grandparents on both sides lived to be quite old. One of them was
yeah.
106, another was 104. I have a cousin right now who just celebrated her 101st birthday this year,
Oh.
still lives in her own house, takes care of herself, all of that. So I have that. And I have two parents who died in their 70s. Now, as
Mm,
I approach 70, what does that tell me? Well, that tells me nothing because I could get the Eris variation of COVID when I go to the grocery store in the morning. I could suddenly die of whatever thing I will suddenly die of. And we need to be very, very conscious that the time we have is precious. Every
yeah.
minute of it is precious. And that we must use it to the best that we can, the best way we can, given our personal histories and our culture and what our lives
Mm,
are like now. Because I don't want to lay the big guilt trip of, well, just get busy. What the hell's wrong with you? Don't waste any time when so many people are still recovering from all sorts of things. Right now, we are in a time where we are watching collapse on a mammoth level. We're watching it. And in my book, Earthworks, I talk about tower times. I've been talking about tower times since the 90s. Since the witch wars of the 90s, I've been talking about tower
right.
times. And I think we're at the place now where all these huge top-down systems are collapsing, just like in the tower
Yeah.
card of Italy. And we have to build new systems fast because if we don't, we
Mm,
will rebuild those same toxic hierarchical systems that we always rebuild. So we've got to be doing that now, which means that we've got to be making connections in ways we don't necessarily want to make connections. So your neighbor with the big Trump sign in the yard, you have already
mm,
made a decision about how you're going to react to that neighbor. But maybe the two of you could have a conversation over tomatoes. And that's not going to save you or them, but it's a conversation over tomatoes. So
Mm.
if we are interested in changing the culture and not just riding out the collapse and then hoping for the best, which is what a lot of
Mm.
Americans especially want to do. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, that's too depressing. I can't really think about it. Well, okay, then we'll let the people who can think about it. But what happens? What happens when you didn't think about it? What
that's the
happens
thing,
when you
right?
didn't do it? Yeah. And so people will say to me, "Oh my gosh, how do you do all the stuff that you do?" I I often joke and say cocaine, but that's
We're
not
not saying
really
that on this
accurate.
show.
We're going to say it's just PG tips, which is actually what it is. But I say to them, I'm 67 years old. How much time do you think I've got left? So I need to if I have thoughts and ideas that I want to get out, I have to do it now. And
Right,
I
right.
can't think that I've got any time other than the moment that I have right now. So that's just the way I look
That's
at it.
huge. That's really huge. That's a jumping off point and permission, right? I feel
Yeah.
like so often, like with what we were saying before, that need to be seen to be a certain thing versus actually
Mhm.
doing that thing. And doing that thing is a stronger legacy, and it gives other people permission to be. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, that's huge. Yeah. I don't know where to go with this now. We're actually coming up close to time, but I guess my last well, my last question then. So, because jumping off of that piece, I think
Yeah,
one of the things that the social collapse, the world state that we're in, I've noticed a big swing towards people wanting to return to the land, homesteaders, a lot of people connected to folkloric witchcraft, a lot of people connected to Trump. Because let's be honest, what does Trump do for some people? He gives them certainty in uncertain times. It's not a certainty I would want, but it is. When you look at whenever there's instability in society, oftentimes popularism becomes a big thing because they offer simpler solutions, right? I'm curious then when it comes to that relationship to place, because so many people are looking for to be grounded. They're looking to get into the old stories. And during the pandemic, people were learning how to knit and bake bread and
yes.
do all of these things, right? And it's wonderful. But that's that needing to be grounded. Um, and so many pagans and witches in North America feel ungrounded from the landscape that they're on because their ancestors didn't come from this place. What is your opinion on relating to place where you're at, and how do people go about that?
Oh, let me just get up on my soapbox. Here we go. Um, I talk a lot, and I wrote about it in Earthworks, about the concept of grieving globally and acting locally. So
Mm,
you know the terrible things that are happening wherever other places they're happening. There are hungry brown children. That is
yeah.
terrible. Now, instead of sending money, which you probably can't afford to do, elsewhere, come home, bring it home, and
Mm,
go, where are the hungry children in my community? And what can I do about that? So
mm,
that instead of being overwhelmed by the enormity of all there is to do, bring it home, bring it home.
mm,
What can you do? What can you do locally? I refer to it as making circles on the ground.
right.
So, what is your local circle on the ground? How do you get together with 3 or 5 or 50 or 1,000 of your closest friends in your neighborhood and start a food pantry or collect food for a food pantry? How do you help people start a community garden? Look for the needs in your community and do your
Mm,
best to answer those because that centers you, it grounds you in the place that you are, and I want to say just a quick word about the urban
totally.
landscape, the built landscape. Most pagans live in middle size or larger towns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they dream constantly of moving into the country
Mm,
where we will have an intentional community and there will be
yes.
gardens and there will be flowing water. And we weave the kind of summerland. It's the Tirnanog in Nebraska. We do
Right.
all
Right.
of that. The reality is that most people are never going to leave their urban setting. They're never going to want to, number one, not
Mm,
really, but they're probably financially never going to be able to do that. But to think that an urban landscape is not nature is a fallacy. It's
Absolutely.
like it's like saying if you and I were in Toronto in the winter and I flew in and you met me at the airport and we both had on our big winter coats and we hugged each other, that the hug doesn't count because we had coats on.
Right.
So just because you walk on concrete in a city setting doesn't mean you're not touching the land because all that concrete came from the land, all of it. And I'm an animal, so I'm going to tell you that concrete has a soul, and all those
Totally.
big buildings have a soul, and the traffic light has a soul, and that you can use all of those in the same way that we use a more natural landscape. You can use it
Yes.
all. Use the energy of it and send that energy back into an urban setting.
Yes.
The glory that is the pagan community, pagan/heathen communities. I like to be very clear about the
Yes.
plurality of that. But our glory, and I said this in Pittsburgh one year when I was supposed to be giving a talk about the importance of community and how we weave community and that stuff I talk about all the time. I just looked out at this group of people and I said, look, we are the island of misfit toys. And that's our superpower. So we don't have to think outside the box because we were never allowed in the box. We always were outsiders, and that's our superpower. So we need to use that. We need to stop trying to fit into a culture that rejected us long ago and to really
Yeah.
build positive, healthy cultures, either around who we are, but more importantly, around where we are. Yeah.
That's huge. That's really important because I've seen the trend. You've probably seen it too. A lot of people, I am the witch of blah blah blah, the witch of Edinburgh, the witch of Asheville, the witch of whatever, and and this isn't criticizing because I have a lot of listeners who peg themselves that way, myself included, but it's about that responsibility piece. I have noticed, though, that that is the shift. That is, suddenly there's a lot of interest then in, okay, I'm here. Who are the spirits locally to me? Who are the folkloric beings locally to me? What is the needs here, right? It's really fulfilling those, or aspiring to fulfill that role in the community, but in the modern 21st century.
Right. And you have to figure out how to do that
Yeah.
because to just call yourself the village witch of a place, well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Because what happens when you're the village witch is that you get the phone calls and you get I understand from the shop down the street that you can do an energy clearing on my house because a village witch is a responsibility. It's not a costume that you wear.
Yeah.
So if you're the
Yeah.
village witch, you have to be ready to take the calls and
Yeah.
you got to be ready to step out and do the work. And
Yeah.
um, Cassandra Latham Jones is so wonderful over in Cornwall because she's really clear about what a village witch does. And she has a lot of fun with some of it, but some of it's really just hard dog work,
Yeah.
frankly. And you do
It's
it
true.
because that's your job. So it's not a
And
costume. Sorry.
it's not a costume. It's not a title that you can just take on. I think this is really important to hear, particularly because small magics is those foundational pieces, right? The title isn't giving you permission. The village is giving you permission to perform those things, right? And
And the
that
spirit.
comes with responsibility.
Yes, and the
Yeah.
spirits are giving you permission because if
Yeah.
you bulldoze your way into a piece of land or into a setting, then you need to make sure you have some kind of accord with the spirit beings of that land because they will reject you if you do not. You come in there with your chest all puffed up that now you are the lord of the manor, and I
Right.
promise you that will not work. It will not work.
It won't work. You'll get fucked up. Funnily enough, so Nathan Hall, who is going to be my next guest next week, I actually interviewed him just an hour before I interviewed you, and he was talking about it was kind of a messed up day, but he was talking about his very first experience as a young animist and taking on that idea of going to the Everglades down in Florida and going and in a very naive sense, I'm going to connect with the Everglades and it's going to be amazing. And he said suddenly it was like all the lasers of the Everglades were pointing at me, and I just, he learned, right? But it was that whole you introduce yourself, you make those connections to that spirit, and you go in humbly, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I can look out the window here and I will
Mm.
see the French Broad River, which is the
Ah.
third oldest river in the world. And I have people all the
Mm.
time who go, oh, and it's a small river. Here, it's a small river. It gets bigger in other places. And people will go, oh, I went down. Oh, I love the little tiny, sweet little French Broad. They go down and they connect with this river. It's the third oldest river in the world. It is
Right.
older than the mountains, older than the mountains. And then they're like, I just, I mean, what is that energy? And it's like, it's the
Mm.
French Broad, you moron. Did you not see? And we often have droughts. And about 5, 6 years ago, we were in some pretty heavy drought time. And
Mm.
you could go to the river, and it was not a lot of water, but it was a lot of stone. And,
Right.
and you would go to the river and just start weeping.
Mm.
And not because of anything you brought with you, but because there's the river. There's the bare,
Hmm.
literally the bare bones of the third oldest river in the world. So how does that
Literally.
feel? Yeah.
That's the thing. It's coming back to that place of listening. So you're experiencing something, then
Yeah.
listening to what that experience is, as opposed to just
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, I'm faint" or something's happening, right?
Yeah.
Last question for you then, because you've spoken about in this interview going to the UK, going to the Borderslands, and people in Appalachia will know this because it was once all connected. But people outside may not realize that Appalachia and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Northern Scotland and that whole area, all going up, all way up, and parts of the Atlas Mountains in Africa, were all
Yes.
connected at one point.
Yes.
What was it like for you going there for the very first time? Tell us about your first time going to that landscape. What did it feel like?
Oh, well, I don't remember the first time because I was 17. I was 17 and giddy and crazy and whatever. But the more I'm there, the more like home it is.
Mm.
So when I go to do my field research in the borders, I always put myself in Carlisle. So
Mm.
Carlisle is the second home for me because it's easy to get to everything I need to get
Yep.
to from Carlisle. And being on that land, well, it's just so home-like. I mean, look at this pale, pasty face. I'm Westmoreland on one side and Ballard, and yeah, Boyd. I mean, that's
Yeah.
where my people come from. And I had my
Mm.
DNA done and discovered I have more Neanderthal than I do
Mm.
anything that's not the British Isles and Western Europe. So it
Mm.
really did feel like coming home. And the
Right.
first time I went to Ireland, I took the catamaran and into Dunleary from Wales. And
Mm.
as soon as I was on the Irish Sea, I just started weeping. And to set foot in Ireland again, and it was profound. It was
Mm.
profound.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that. That's the feeling I get when I go home. When I'm in Ontario here, because I never really connected with up here, and certain parts have felt like Nathan and I were talking about local places, like connecting to local places, having a relationship with local places. But on a vast scale, Ontario, I don't have much of a relationship with. It's almost like that feeling of, oh, it's you again. Yeah, it's you again, right?
Yeah.
When I go
How long have
home,
you been
though,
there? How long have you been
28
there?
years. 28 years. Yeah,
That's a
I
long
know,
time.
right? That's a very long time. So I have places in Ontario that I love and I have a feeling towards, but the relationship generally, because I never formed that relationship with this place. So I only clued into honoring this sense of place now that when I made the decision I was going to leave, suddenly I started to feel
Uh,
more connection with this place. So I know that if I come back on holiday and visit my parents and whatnot, Ontario will be welcoming, but it's not, I don't have that close relationship. But I
I
worked in
get
the
it.
UK 10 years ago for 6 months, and as soon as I got off the plane after 15 years of being away, it was like, oh, hello, it's you again. Welcome back, right?
And I
Oh.
remember being in Ireland and people saying, "Well, you look remarkably like my cousin, my sister, whatever. Are your
Mm.
people Irish?" And I would go, "Yes, but we left Ireland. We left Ulster in the 1700s."
Right.
And and the response always was that I was family, and thank God I didn't have to go through the hunger.
Ah,
So there
right.
wasn't the sense of, oh, you've been gone so long you hardly count anymore. There was never
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
That's such a huge part of Irish culture, though, connecting. Like, I hear this all the time. People will often, even when they're traveling North America, oh, you're from Ireland. Oh, your grandparents are from Ireland. Where are they from? Oh, Kilkenny. Oh, well, my great grandmother comes from Kilkenny or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Byron, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you
It
so much for
has.
joining me. This has
I've
been a
really
wonderful
enjoyed it.
start.
Good. Very good.
So if this is coming out, this is Tuesday that this is coming out. Your book is coming out
Mhm.
tomorrow. The audiobook now
Sure.
we've established is coming out on Friday. What else do you have coming up? What would you like to plug?
Well, as we talked earlier, I have my new book, which is Small Magics, which comes out tomorrow. And on September 1st, I turned in the new book, which is Feral Church, Finding Goddess in the
Oh,
Wilderness.
love
So
it.
that will be the next thing for me. But honestly, the next thing for me is going to be clearing out my garden and
Mhm.
planting the things that will winter over, spinach,
Mm,
carrots, and things like that. So I get to return to the land for a little while, and I need that. I need it.
wonderful.
I need it bad.
I feel you on that. I feel you on that, especially looking at the rest of my day today. So I feel you on that. I will put your website and the links to your book down below. And for those who go and find Byron
Yeah.
online, giving likes to authors and other producers is really important to us and really a good way of supporting us. Also, go and get the book too. It's really good. I had the honor of reading an advanced copy. Byron,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. Thank you
And
so
thank you.
much again.
And good luck on your book.
Thank you. Yes, it's about to come out. I mean, some people already have it, so it's kind of a weird liminal space, but thank you so much and good luck with yours too.
Thank you. Thank you.
For those of you who are watching or listening to this, join me next week as Nathan Hall, who is the author of Path of the Moonlit Hedge, Discovering the Magic of Animistic Witchcraft, which will have a lot of ties in with my conversation today with Byron. Join us on Tuesday. That will be on both Spotify and onto YouTube. And join us for the rest of the season as I welcome all sorts of folkloric and traditional witches. I've been Ben Stimson. This has been Byron Ballard, and we will see you next time.